I was 48 years old when I was finally diagnosed with ADHD, 48. And when I told my tío, who happens to be a retired psychologist, his response was, "Oh, I could have told you that." So I said, "Well, why didn't you?" And he looked at me and said, "Do you not know who your parents were?" And I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry, so I kind of did both, because that answer said everything. Not just about my parents, but about an entire culture that loves deeply and still doesn't always have the language for what its people are actually carrying. A ver, vecino, let's sit down for this one. Make sure to grab your cafecito. And welcome to episode 10 of the Entre Mundos Podcast. This is a space for bicultural Latinos navigating life between cultures. Aquí hablamos de cultura, identidad, mental health, family expectations, and what it means to honor your roots without losing yourself. For those of you that are new here, I'm John Eli, your bicultural vecino who understands cultura y psychology. I work as a trauma-informed counselor and as a nervous system educator. But more than that, I'm someone who has lived in this in-between space his whole life. This podcast is my way of putting to language what a lot of us carry but don't always know how to say. Now, before we get deeper into today's conversation, I want to offer a quick reminder. This podcast is not therapy and it's not a replacement for therapy. This space is for reflection and conversation. Mejor think of it as a plática con tu vecino favorito. Ahora sí, let's talk. A ver, let me ask you something before we get into this. Growing up, if someone in your family was struggling mentally or emotionally, how did people talk about it? Not in therapy language, not in clinical terms, but in the actual words that got used around the dinner table, or hushed conversations, or in the way that someone got described when they walked into the room. Because in a lot of Latino families, mental health doesn't always get called mental health. It gets called something else entirely. You hear things like, le botó la canica, está mal de la cabeza, le falta un tornillo. And if things got really serious, you might hear someone say something like, trae un demonio, es falta de Dios, o le falta oración. I grew up hearing these phrases all the time. And I want to be careful here because I don't want to mock the people who said them. They weren't cruel. They were working with what they had. In communities where survival required keeping it together, where showing weakness could cost you everything. The idea that your mind could be struggling was genuinely threatening. There was no framework for it. There was no language for it. No safe place to put it. So it got explained the only way that people knew how. I started this episode talking about how I was recently diagnosed with ADHD. And when I look back at the kid that I was, it completely makes sense. I was hyper, I was running, I was moving, always making something or creating something. I picked up multiple instruments and played them. I joined every club possible at school. I was always in trouble for talking too much, and I struggled focusing on anything for too long. And I had no idea what was happening inside of my brain. I had no idea that what was happening inside of my brain actually had a name. Nobody did. Or at least nobody said anything. Because here's the thing about growing up in a family and community that doesn't have a language for neurodivergence. And to be honest, I'm not even sure the word existed back then. You see, you don't get a diagnosis. You get a label, and it's not a clinical one. Just the quiet understanding that you're a lot, que eres malcriado, that you need to settle down. And there's something about you that needs to be managed with a chancla instead of being understood. My mom struggled with anxiety most of her life. I know that now. But growing up, it wasn't called anxiety. It was called nervios. And the way that I learned about it wasn't through conversation. It was the way that she used it. When my brother and I would argue and fight, which if you grew up with siblings, you know how that goes. My mom would say things like, no hagas eso, me vas a dar un ataque de nervios. And as a kid, I didn't know what an ataque de nervios was, but I knew it had to be bad. So I tried my best to behave. What I didn't know then was that my mom was carrying something real. something that had a name, something that runs through the maternal side of my family like an invisible thread that nobody ever talks about. We just called it nervios, and we learned to tiptoe around it. Then I turned 18. It was the second semester at New Mexico State University. I was at college. And one afternoon, I was stopped at a stoplight in my 1968 Volkswagen Beetle because, yes, that was my car at the time. And something happened to me that I had no framework for whatsoever. In that moment, suddenly I was convinced that I was going to die right there in the car. Part of me knew that that was irrational, and there was another part of me that was completely convinced that this was it. So I put the car in neutral, threw on the hazards, I pulled the emergency brake, and I cried for what felt like forever for me. That was my first panic attack. And I had no idea what it was because nobody ever told me that my body could do that. Nobody ever told me that your nervous system could convince you that you were dying when nothing was physically wrong. Nobody had given me that language. So I drove home and I called my mom, and she consoled me a bit. And then she told me I needed to go to church so that they could echar afuera el demonio de ansiedad. And I want to sit with that for a second because I know how that sounds. I know that some of you might be nodding your head right now because you may have heard something similar. And some of you are hearing something like this for the very first time, and it'd be hard to understand. But here's what I want you to know about my mom. She was amazing. She loved me completely. She wanted the best for me. And that response, as hard as it is to sit with it, came from a complete and coherent worldview that she had been given long before I was born. She wasn't dismissing me. She was offering me the only framework that she had. And that stings. And today I can hold that sting while also holding the love underneath it. Both are true at the same time. And here's what I want you to sit with for a moment. I had my first panic attack at 18. I walked into a therapy room at the age of 39. It's 21 years. And it's not because I didn't need help, not because I wasn't struggling, but because I didn't have a map. Because the culture that I came from explained my pain in ways that didn't point towards a therapist. And the culture that I was stepping into had its own limitations in understanding where I was coming from. So I did what a lot of us do. I kept going. I managed. I survived until surviving wasn't enough anymore. At 39, I found myself in a bundle of unhealthy coping skills. And on top of that, I started to battle chronic pain, which I later discovered was my body's response to childhood trauma it had been holding for a very long time. I looked in the mirror one day and I didn't recognize the man that was looking back at me. I had become someone that I never thought that I would be. And in that moment, in the middle of everything just falling apart, something became clear to me. Regardless of what was happening around me, regardless of what became of my marriage, regardless of anything external, I still had to live with myself in this body for the rest of my life. And that was the moment that I chose to work on me. I found a therapist and I began to do the work. Not because it was easy, not because I had it all figured out, but because the alternative was continuing to not recognize myself. And I wasn't willing to do that anymore. Here's something that I want to name that doesn't get talked about enough. The stigma around mental health doesn't just live in Latino culture. It lives in American culture too, just differently. In Latino families, mental health gets explained through spiritual frameworks, through moral frameworks, through the idea that if you just get ocupado en algo, se te quita todo. If you think positive, if you pray harder, it will pass. And in American spaces, they tell you to practice mindfulness, to journal, to do self-care, to go to therapy. Pero here's the thing. Most of the gringos that I know don't actually practice mindfulness either. Both cultures have their own way of not fully dealing with this. One spiritualizes it and one commercializes it. And the bicultural Latino is standing between both worlds trying to figure out which one actually has the answer. And the only honest truth is this: neither one has the complete picture because neither one was built with our specific experience in mind. I'm 48 now. I have an ADHD diagnosis. That finally makes sense of a lifetime of patterns. I've been in therapy, I've done the work, I understand my nervous system in ways that I never did before, and I'm still learning. But here's what I know: the phrases that I grew up hearing, like le botó la canica, está mal de la cabeza, nomás está exagerando, those phrases weren't born from cruelty. They were born from a community that never had been given a better language. And the spiritual frameworks, la manda, la novena, the casting out of demons, some of the people walking around going to a curandera with the huevo, those weren't born from ignorance. They were born from a genuine desire to bring healing to people who were suffering. And today I can honor the intention and still acknowledge that it wasn't enough for what I needed. Both of these things are true. And I'm learning a new way of being, one that holds both, that honors what my parents and my community did with what they had, and that is also brutally honest about my pain, my emotions, my thoughts, my body sensations, and my urges to self-medicate. Y eso, that's not betrayal. That's what healing looks like, Entre Mundos. And here's what gives me hope. In both cultures, Latino and American, there's a growing number of people who are willing to have difficult conversations about mental health, who are willing to hold space for people around them, who are healing, who are willing to say, this is real, this has a name, and you don't have to carry it alone. Mira, vecino, you might be one of those people. You might be listening to this because you're trying to find language for something that you've been carrying for a very long time. And if that's you, I want you to know something. Getting support is not weakness. It's not a betrayal of your culture. It's not a sign that your faith isn't strong enough. It's not cosa de gringos. It's one of the most courageous things a person can do, especially whenever nobody around you gave you permission to do it first. So I want to leave you with this. Think about the language that you grew up with around mental health, the phrases, the explanation, the silence. And then think about where you are now. What language do you have today that you didn't have back then? And if there is someone in your life, a younger version of yourself, or someone you love right now was still waiting for someone to give them a better language, you don't have to fix anything today. Just notice, just name it, just the way that a gentle witness would. Because if you can honor the community that raised you and still decide that you and the people you love deserve more than silence, that's what it means to honor your roots without losing yourself. If this is something that you're actively working through, I put together a free boundaries guide specifically for bicultural Latinos. And it walks you through how to start using your voice without feeling like you're losing your people. And you can find it on my Substack. The link is in the description. And if this is something you've experienced, know that you're not the only one. These are conversations many of us have lived but never have had the space to talk about. So if someone came to mind while you were listening, do me a favor, compártelo. Send them this episode, porque sometimes hearing something said out loud can make a difference. Oye, before I let you go, every Monday I drop a new episode right here on Entre Mundos. And every Tuesday over Substack, I take the topic we talked about and go deeper into it. The psychology, the cultural layer of all of it. Think of the podcast as the conversation and the article as where we sit down with it. So if today's episode opened something up for you, the article drops mañana. The link is in the description. And one more thing, I won't be releasing a new episode on Memorial Day. So take that Monday to rest, be with your people, and honor what that day means. And know that I'll be back on June 1st. Don't miss it. And if you want to continue this conversation, you can always find me on Substack, TikTok, and Instagram under Entre Mundos Collective. And of course, don't forget to tell all your vecinos about your favorite bicultural vecino who understands cultura y psychology. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of your people, and keep honoring your roots without losing yourself. Un abrazo fuerte. Hasta luego. Bye.